Good morning and welcome to Building Hamilton with Ken Bekendam, brought to you by LegalSecondSuites.com, right here on 900 CHML. Rick Zamperin with you along with Ken Bekendam. Ken, good morning. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great, Rick. It's great to be back here and to be able to talk to your listeners again this month and basically chat everything there is about legal second suites and additional dwelling units.
Yeah, let's get a refresher on what LegalSecondSuites.com is all about.
Yeah, so we're a company. We started back in 2018 approximately, and we're out there helping the everyday homeowner, property investors, create legal second dwelling units in their homes and on their properties. We work with probably a few hundred people a year. We help them, create spaces from scratch. So in a place or a part of their home or property where there was never anything before, like an empty basement or an empty garage. Or we help them legalize an existing apartment that they may have at their home, but it was just never taken through the proper approval process. So we help with that.
We should underline the word legal as well, because you've seen many illegal second suites.
Yeah, like there's been apartments going in for decades and decades and decades, okay? Like, I'm sure a lot of our listeners have seen these old apartments. Maybe they live in one of these apartments. Maybe they own one of these apartments in their properties. Going back like 50 plus years, right? And it wasn't until recently that we've been able to do them legally with the changes that, the province has made, the municipalities have made with the zoning bylaws. It's not until recently in the last 2 to 3 years here that we've been able to do it much, much easier. Mm-hmm. And so this is why there's a big renewed focus on creating legal secondary dwelling units.
And there's an important aspect to this because we're talking about people's safety. We're also talking about people's economical well-being, because you can capitalize on, some extra space in your home. There's really a big win-win situation.
Yeah, especially now more than ever, with inflation, with the rising interest rates, with just, the cost of living in general going up, we're definitely seeing a bigger need and a desire to just be more efficient with what we have, being more efficient with the space that we have, we're definitely seeing a renewed interest in multi-generational living or multi-family living, where we have multiple family units living on the same property under the same roof, to help make life more affordable.
Excellent stuff. Get more out of your home and book a free consultation today. Go online to LegalSecondSuites.com. We have a number of very interesting topics we're going to get to today, including modular homes, what they're all about. Now, you might be interested in getting one. We'll talk about parking, and that is certainly an issue in many parts of this city. The shortage of rental housing, obviously a huge topic, not only in this city, but this province, really in this country. But we're going to start with safe senior housing. So we have seniors in every community, in every corner of this country and in this province who, might be in a situation where they need to move or they need to, develop something in their own home. What should we know about safe senior housing?
Well, let's just take a step back and look at just the demographics here. So we have definitely an aging population.
Yes.
Okay. There's more and more people that are getting into retirement. They're aging. And just like lots of other types of housing, we have a big lack of, quality seniors housing. Whether that's assisted living, whether that's, long-term care, or just these 55 plus retirement communities, right? We just have a lack of that type of housing around. And so as our population ages, we're seeing immense pressure on our seniors accommodation, we're seeing stuff in the community happening right now. We just saw the news article about Black Adair, the community care home in Dundas, and a lot of the facilities that we do have, they're aging, they're getting quite old, and there's been a lack of investments by both governments and by the private sector in quality seniors housing. And what we're seeing right now in the senior space is that if there's not enough units in a building, it's very difficult for these large seniors operator, these larger operating companies who manage these seniors homes, if there's not enough units in the building, it's very hard to make the economics work around it. Right. And that's why we're seeing, these smaller homes, these that have, less than maybe 50, 60 beds, they're not getting the investments that they need because there's not economic case there to be made. And so a lot of these types of facilities are being redeveloped by developers into these larger, more high density developments. And that's a big problem, right? It's a big problem because we're losing quality senior housing, right? So yes, we need more investments by our governments in big seniors developments. But this is where the opportunity is for those of us who have extra space in our homes, who have aging parents, who are concerned about, being able to find a quality space for them when the time comes, for them to take a look at the space that they have. And again, like a lot of our boomers, they were blessed to be able to get into home ownership when they did, be able to get into these larger homes when they did, and they, their kids have moved on, and they have the space to be able to do it.
Certainly in the early stages of the pandemic, when many pandemic victims, for lack of a better term, were in those old age homes, those retirement facilities, those long-term care homes, who have been, and rightfully so, criticized for the level of care that they were providing, because it was certainly substandard. During that time, did you get a surge, or did the industry see a surge in people calling and contacting you to say, listen, I don't want to put my parents there because of what's happening. Can you build something for us? Do we have the necessary requirements in our home to do this?
I wouldn't say that there's been like a surge, like a big wave of demand, but there is an ongoing continued interest and desire for it. Because, again, as we every year, every couple months, every year, we see, another retirement home or long-term care facility in the media, about substandard living conditions. And so as that becomes more commonplace, we're definitely getting more calls for it. Yeah. But it's not a huge surge yet. But don't get me wrong, it's going to be a continuing trend for sure.
We might see a big surge because we know that boomers are getting up there in age. Their parents are living longer. So there might come a time where, a lot of these parents are thinking, I'm going to sell my house now, but I don't want to live in a long-term care facility. I'll just move in with my kids again, who are seniors themselves, but they might have really elderly parents. What's the number one question you get asked from these individuals who want to build a secondary dwelling in their home?
Yeah, well, the number one question is it going to be permitted? First and foremost, will my zoning allow it? Like, can I do it on my property? And so, one of the first things that we check is into the zoning bylaw, making sure that, it's a permitted use, that a secondary dwelling unit, an additional dwelling unit, maybe it's secondary dwelling unit detached. Here in Hamilton, they're called secondary dwelling unit and additional dwelling unit, depending on which bylaw you're under. Okay. But that's the first thing that we check, is make sure that, first and foremost, we're allowed to do it by the zoning. And then the second thing is really just making sure that the space will be able to comply with the minimum building code standards. And the biggest one being, and the most expensive one to fix, would be ceiling height. Making sure we have our minimum ceiling heights under the code. And, a lot of other things can be fixed through renovations. So let's say, for instance, you don't have the proper window sizes, okay? Or you don't have an egress window. We can add windows, we can install new windows. But something like a ceiling height, if your basement is only so high, it could be very expensive to lower the floor, maybe raise a beam, do bench footings or underpinnings. It can get very costly, for sure, right? Yeah. So, when we're trying to determine if it's feasible or not to make a unit, like, that's the big one we're checking is our ceiling height. If you had 100 jobs, let's just say, what's the percentage where you'd have to lower the floor? Is it under 10%? Is this a very rare occurrence? Well, we're actually seeing more and more people decide to lower their basements if they don't have the space, because with such a lack of housing, and with housing being so expensive, like, every square foot is valuable, right? Valuable space. And especially in the lower city, we see, like, like the lower city or just older homes in general, we see lower basement ceiling heights. And, a number of years ago, we would never consider doing bench footing or underpinning to capitalize on that space just because the economics weren't there. Because it can be quite expensive. It's very labor intensive, right? You got to, imagine jackhammering out a concrete floor slab, physically hand digging it out in some cases with conveyor belts. And so it's very labor intensive, right? Hence why it's so costly. But with house prices being where they are, like that's a lot of square footage and that's a whole level to your home.
Absolutely.
Right? And definitely, we're doing more and more of those types of projects every year.
When you are going through the zoning investigative stage, is it more often than not you're getting a green light?
Yeah, well, with the changes that the municipalities have made with the zoning bylaws, it's definitely much more permissive than it used to be. The vast majority of municipalities now in Ontario are allowing them in single-family dwellings. So most municipalities you come across now, we are allowed to do them in a single-family home. When it comes to the coach houses or the garden suites or the detached dwelling units, most municipalities have some form of bylaw in place for them, but there's still some restrictions on where and how big and not every single zone would allow those detached coach houses, but with Bill 28 that just came out, allowing the 3 units, we're definitely seeing municipalities quickly updating their bylaws.
Still to come, we're going to talk a little bit about parking and how that is definitely an issue in this community, and modular units as well. We started off by talking about safe senior housing and how our long-term care facilities are really, they're lacking in many regards. And if you are able to build a legal second suite in your home to take care of an aging parent or a loved one, that is a definite plus in your home for a number of reasons. Number one, you're caring for a loved one and you're adding some value to your home. But in our first segment, you mentioned Bill 28, but it's a different bill that you were referencing.
Yeah, sorry, it's Bill 23. Okay. You know what? There's so much.
There's so many.
There's so many changes that are happening. There's so many different bills coming out in policies, and that was my mistake. But it's Bill 23.
Okay, Bill 23. We'll keep you all straightened out on the number of bills. Rental housing. This is a massive issue in this community. Hamilton City Council looking at deeply affordable rental units and housing units for those on the super low income scale. When it comes to rental housing in general, what should people know about what's available out there and what could be available if they are to develop something in their house?
There's so many more opportunities now for where we can add these types of units, right? There is such a shortage of quality rental apartment units. Yeah. And yes, housing is a multifaceted file. There's a lot of different things that affect housing and just social programs in general. But a lot of experts agree that we just fundamentally have a shortage, right? And what's nice about legal secondary dwelling units and additional dwelling units and garden suites and coach houses and granny flats and whatever you want to call these things is that they're easy wins. They're relatively quick to get approved and constructed. Whereas when we're trying to create new construction or new developments or purpose-built rental buildings, those can take many, many years to get approved and can be much more costly per unit to develop. We're just hearing right now about our city council here approving some extra funding for City Housing Hamilton. Spending a few $1 million here to basically fix up these. We have hundreds and hundreds of vacant units. City Housing Hamilton has hundreds of vacant units in this city that have been empty for years. Yet we have people living in the streets here in tents. And so this is an easy win for the city to spend some money on getting these existing units back on the market and get people into these places. So it's amazing that the council is, going to be hopefully approving the funding, which most likely will. and because it's an easy win. It's an easy win for the city.
And when we're talking about, rental housing, this, we're talking about those basement apartments, we're talking about those additional or secondary kind of dwelling units. Do you get the sense that when you are talking to clients or prospective clients that they fully understand what they're capable of doing on their property?
It's still a relatively new concept for a lot of people. And being able to helping people understand the vision or the opportunity that's right in front of them. So some people look at this kind of like this empty garage, for instance. They're like, can I actually make that into a unit?
Right.
I'm like, yeah, 100% we can. Like, look at all the space we have. Look, you got a window here, or we can replace the garage door with a window and an entry door. Look how much volume of space you have. Same thing with, like a side addition to their home or a second floor, just helping people envision how they can kind of relay out the home, or, let's build a wall here. And all of a sudden we've got this completely separated space. We can add a kitchen along this wall, and we can put a stacked laundry machine over here. Helping people understand the vision for a space really opens people's eyes and helps them realize the opportunity that's right there in front of them. And in my case, we've been through, probably, I don't know, thousands of homes. And so after a while, you can quickly see the opportunity and where you can add more living space.
Is a garage addition, if you will, more challenging than a basement, or do they each offer like a unique set of what ifs or red flags? Especially if you're tearing down walls, you might not know what you're getting into, right?
Yeah, like there's pros and cons to different spaces that we're considering in our home. Like, yes, the basement is typically the number one space that we consider, and oftentimes is the easier space to renovate, especially if we have our ceiling height. Just a matter of maybe doing some waterproofing, right. Framing up some walls, some fire separation, adding in the kitchen and bathroom. It's not that different from just doing a typical finished basement renovation. It's just, we're typically adding in more fire separation. The garage conversions, it really depends on the state of the garage. Like if it's a good, solid, well-built garage, it can be a very, very easy renovation, just kind of like a basement. The biggest difference being that we have to run services to the garage. So a sanitary line, a water line, maybe a gas line, electrical line. And so obviously that involves more trenching through the yard to get those services there. So a little bit more destructive to your landscaping. But they can be very straightforward, renovations as well.
There has been, for years now, and this is nothing new, a horde of home reno shows on television. Has that helped, or has that hindered what you do and what other home renovators and the like kind of do? Because people might watch these shows and maybe have unrealistic expectations or dollar figures in their mind. Do you find that to be a help or a hindrance sometimes?
I would say it's probably been a help because it's helped the general public realize the importance of doing things properly, right? Doing things the right way, especially Mike Homes on Homes.
That's
and,
right. Yep.
Helping property owners do renovations the right way, working with quality trades, pulling those building permits, getting those inspections done, using the proper building materials. So that's been a big plus with all of these home improvement shows. The downside is the timelines, right? In a half-hour episode,
everything's done.
They're going from demolition to a completed project in a 30-minute episode, where that's just not realistic, right? So there's a lot of expectations that, I need to, redo with or correct with my clients and say, look, it's going to take us X amount of, weeks or months, to get our building permit. It's going to be X amount of months, for the renovation. And, this could be a 5, 6, 8 month, could be a year project, right? So it's kind of just resetting those expectations. But in general, I think it's been a good thing. It's been, it's helped people look at these rundown, ugly spaces and help people envision what they could be.
That's pretty cool. To get more out of your home, book a free consultation today online, LegalSecondSuites.com. We're in discussion with Ken Bekendam. It's Building Hamilton with Ken Bekendam, brought to you by LegalSecondSuites.com on 900 CHML. Back to the rental housing, the shortage of it. if we're building more of these things or renovating and creating more legal second suites, that's obviously going to benefit the people who are moving in to those suites, those aging parents, the loved ones, or just people who need a place to live. But it's also going to benefit the people who own these properties as well. This is a huge win-win for the property owner.
Yeah, like one thing about having it as a legal recognized apartment unit is that it brings a source of legal income. And especially now with interest rates being so high, the qualifying rate to get a mortgage or to refinance a mortgage is really, really high. I haven't met one property owner, one property investor, one first-time home buyer who doesn't desire more legal income to their name when it comes to qualifying for a mortgage. Yeah. And so it's hugely, hugely valuable. Yes, there are lots of other benefits to having it as a legal space, but the legal income component can't be understated enough. And, it does bring a lot of value to the home, right? You just go to realtor.ca, you ask your realtor, you ask for comps on recent sold properties, and you have a single family dwelling versus a single family dwelling with a legal secondary dwelling unit. That property with the legal secondary dwelling unit is valued much more. Why? Because it's much easier to qualify for that property on a mortgage.
Right.
And if somebody can more easily qualify for a property, that property is in higher demand, right? And when something's in higher demand, it's worth more.
Yeah. Do you at all take any calls from people who are just really blunt to say, I just want to build a space for an Airbnb or something that I can rent out on a short-term basis? Is that becoming more and more popular?
I would say no,
Really?
Because, a lot of our municipalities have been coming out with Airbnb restrictions in their bylaws. That was a big thing that we used to help people with, create legal apartments, and then they would then turn around and rent them out on Airbnb. The biggest reason is because, they didn't have to deal with the issues with tenants and all of the backlogs at the landlord-tenant board.
Right.
Big reason why we've seen a push into the Airbnbs is because we have issues at our landlord-tenant board. And it taking a very long time for not only landlords, but also for tenants to actually, get justice at the tribunal. And so it was much easier for people to do the Airbnbs. But there's obviously issues with that, right? It did take rental housing out of the market. And that's why we've seen our municipalities come out with these restrictions and these additional bylaws to restrict that. Yeah. But I would say it's not as popular as it used to be. Yeah, it's definitely a trend that is going down right now, unfortunately.
When it comes to
fortunately, depending how
depending on where you are. When it comes to legal second suites, let's just envision a basement apartment. What are the absolute must-haves, and what are some of the perks that people are now beginning to add to these spaces?
We're definitely seeing a trend to, a more universal design. So a universal design is design that makes a space universally accessible to people of all types, right? Not just, mobility, disability issues, but could be, people that are deaf or blind, especially in regards to creating senior housing or spaces for our aging parents, making those spaces just easier to function in. And there's a big trend, not only in secondary dwellings, but just in development, housing development in general, just push towards a universal design type of idea for these spaces. But not only that, it's also flexible design. So taking a space and being able to have options with it. So, for instance, creating a space where it could be used as a home office, or a space where you could put a Murphy bed that can kind of maybe fold up against the wall or come down. And these spaces where we can maybe close a door, and then somebody could almost have like a separate living quarters within the confines of the larger legal dwelling unit. So if they have visitors coming over, or friends, or their parents are coming, and kind of creating these spaces that can be used in a lot of different types of ways.
Providing that flexibility is big.
Yeah,
obviously.
Yeah.
When you are looking at the design phase, how involved are people in it? Do they want to see what they want to see, or are you offering suggestions because you've seen thousands of these things, you've built thousands of these things? How much back and forth is there between you and the client in terms of how it's going to look?
Yeah, like there's flexibility on design and how you lay out a space, but there's also a lot of constraints that go into designing a space. Like if we look at a basement apartment, for instance, we have structural columns, we have structural beams, we have plumbing stacks, we have a water meter, we have a furnace, we have hot water tanks, we have windows. We have the stairs to get out of the basement. There's a lot of constraints that you have to design around. Obviously we have our minimum building code requirements, like a minimum room size for a kitchen, a living room, a dining room, a bedroom. So all of this, you have to take all of this stuff into account when you're designing out a space. And so in some cases, the space almost designs itself, because you can only do so much.
Right, yeah.
But at the same time, we do offer flexibility to our clients. Say, hey, look, yes, here's one option that we could do. Maybe it's a nice, spacious one-bedroom layout, and we have ample space. Or here's an option for a nice two-bed. It might be a little bit more cramped, but we can get that second bedroom into that space. And, there's definitely, depending on, where your unit is and what part of the city you're in, we see a different demand for a one-bed apartment versus a two-bed or even a three-bed. Here in Hamilton, they don't allow a three-bedroom secondary dwelling unit.
Really? Okay.
But you can do a two-bed plus a den, okay? And that's just more of a terminology thing. So if we have a space that maybe it doesn't have a window, but we can create another kind of finished space, we can call it a den or a rec room or something else to kind of get around a building code requirement.
Right.
We try and work with our clients, obviously, and depending on their target. Right. If it's going to be a student rental, is it going to be for a young couple starting out? Is it going to be for an older, senior? Is it going to be put on the short-term rental market? Yeah, there's different things that we consider. Yeah.
Lots of variables and lots of other topics that we're going to get to today on the show, including parking and modular units for garden suites or secondary dwelling unit. Parking is a huge issue pretty much no matter where you are in the city. It can be on the mountain, lower city, downtown, East End, whatever the case is. Parking is in certain aspects of the city, really important for homeowners, for people who want to get around the city and not be clogged in. How big of a factor is it when you are planning with a client on a legal second suite? When does the parking conversation happen?
Yeah, like parking is a topic that we address or we talk about from day one, from the very beginning of the project. And depending what zoning you're in, like here in Hamilton, they have recently got rid of the parking requirements for secondary dwelling units in particular, just to help make it easier to get these units in and result in less kind of minor variance applications for parking. But parking is still important, okay? Like, to a certain extent, we still are a car-dependent society. Yes, there's trends that are pushing us to less cars, self-driving cars or Uber or the people working from home and not having to go into an office space. But, we're kind of in this period of time where we still need cars. We still need to park somewhere. But parking is obviously not great for the environment, right? Obviously we know cars aren't great for the environment, especially the fuel gas powered ones. But, when we have to create a parking space, we have to excavate soil. We need equipment to do that. We need, maybe a bobcat or an excavator. Those run on diesel fuel, which exhausts into the atmosphere. We need crushed gravel. So we need mines and quarries to crush gravel for us. It has to get trucked by a dump truck. We need asphalt or concrete, right? So there's different mines out there that make asphalt, and asphalt is made with oil, right, which comes from the ground. So the more parking spaces that we create, like, it doesn't help us with the environment, right? It takes up more grass on our lawns, right? So we're creating more hardscaping versus softscaping, which then, it generates more rain runoff going into our storm systems, which, oftentimes get overwhelmed, and especially here in Hamilton, and then they overflow into the creek, which makes it makes its way into the harbor, right? So it's great that the city has, removed the parking requirements. But look, yes, it does create issues sometimes in our neighborhoods, especially these neighborhoods in the city that are very tight, right? Especially in the lower city. Up on Hamilton Mountain, not so much, but definitely in the lower city, it gets tight, it gets crowded. And, I feel for residents sometimes who live in those areas because it is very tight. But it's something that we do address. Again, to me, I think parking should be more of a market-driven thing. If somebody's going to rent out a property without a parking space, well, they can limit their potential tenant pool. And tenants who want a parking space, well, they're not frankly going to rent that space if they can't park their car. Right. They're going to go look elsewhere. So I think it should be a market-driven item. So is the restriction or the requirement here in Hamilton null? Like there's none anymore? You can just have as many parking spaces as you wish? Or is there still a hard number on how much space you can dedicate to parking? Yeah, so for secondary dwelling units, additional dwelling units, they don't require an additional parking space for that unit, right? Other types of developments, especially new development, if we're going to be building a new apartment building, we're going to be building a new single-family dwelling in a subdivision, yes, we still require parking spaces for those new developments. Right. But the secondary dwellings, they don't require them. If we're converting an existing building, so let's say we have a vacant, for instance, I'm doing a project downtown on Barton Street. We're converting a vacant medical building to 22 apartment units. Oh, wow. Because we're converting an existing building, we don't have to provide parking spaces for those units, which is great, especially in the lower city where we have these old, big, vacant buildings on tiny plots of land. They don't have any available space for any parking. We're able to get 22 units down into this on Barton Street in the city and not require parking, which makes it very easy from an approval process, which is great because now we can get more housing units quicker into the marketplace. And, these types of units in that part of the city, well, frankly, the people that are most likely to live in those units probably don't have a car. Right. They're probably walking or biking or using public transportation. How is that project going along? So we are super close to getting our building permit. Wow. And we're super excited to get the construction started. So it's a big win for the city. Where we're creating, 22 one-bedroom and bachelor apartment units right in the heart of the city on Barton Street. So it'd be great for the Barton Street Village area, bring a lot more people living into that part of the city. Absolutely. That sounds like fantastic. Good news story. We need a lot more of those, that's for sure. So let's talk about modular homes. We don't see too many of the modular units, I should say. We don't see too many of them in the city. There's a couple here and there. I can vision one on the Jollycut, which looks kind of cool, and I'm sure it's cool to live in. Where are we at in the city with modular units? Yeah, so modular units are still kind of a growing trend or growing idea, I should say. I wouldn't say it's really a trend quite yet. There's still a lot of fundamental issues with modular building. Especially modular building in regards to secondary dwelling units and secondary dwelling detached, like the coach houses and stuff. Right. The biggest problem we have with modular right now is that, when we're trying to design a space in somebody's backyard in the lower city, we have zoning bylaws that restrict us as far as like a rear yard setback, a side yard setback, gross floor area. We have a principal building setback, so a 7.5 meter setback from the back of your house to this coach house. And so there's a lot of restrictions that restrict the size and location of one of these units on your property. So and most people I talk to, they want to fully maximize the space that they can erect a unit to justify their investment into this unit, right? So people want to maximize their gross floor area. They're not looking to build the smallest thing. They're looking to build the biggest thing. And so modular is sometimes very difficult to fit in that box because we have a kind of modular, you have a set size that you're purchasing from the manufacturer. So, and we also have height restrictions too, right? So there's a lot of restrictions that restrict. So like, unless you live out on a nice big, country property and you can just buy one of these units and plunk them into your yard with no care for setbacks or anything, then that's one thing. But most of us are trying to put these into an urban setting. So there's just fundamentally a lot of restrictions that really make it feasible. And especially here in Ontario and Canada, we don't have really large mass volume production of modular units that has brought the price point down to a point where it's really competitive with traditional construction. I've interviewed and met with a lot of different modular builders as we explore this as an option for our clients. And, almost 10 out of 10 times when we get to the conversation about price, we're looking at the price point like, well, heck, this is probably going to be more expensive than if we just built something the traditional way in our yard. Yeah. There's pros and cons, when you build with modular, you can drastically reduce your on-site construction time because the unit is built off-site. So if you're trying to get in and out of a property in a very quick timeline, especially on-site, a modular unit is one consideration. And again, from, a foundation perspective, a lot of times we're setting up modular units on helical piers or sonotubes, and we don't have a poured concrete foundation that needs to be excavated and that soil trucked away, and so it's can be a lot less destructive to the site. But like some of these backyards, it's actually very hard to ship in or even crane in a modular unit into the backyard space. So they're an option that's out there. We're not seeing them rapidly be used just because really the price point is pretty much the same, if not more expensive than a traditional way. But what we're seeing happening down in the States with companies like Boxable, which I'm sure some of our listeners have seen. Boxable is like a prefab box, a 20 by 20 modular box. Which is a housing unit, and they're mass producing these things at volume, where they're getting them down to I think about $60,000 US for a 20 by 20 home, and they're pumping them out on a factory line. And that's what you need with modular to get the price point down. It's like a manufactured product. And so what we see with a lot of the smaller guys up here who, they're building them in their warehouse or in a shop with a couple guys, they're not getting the volume discount, and they're not getting the efficiencies of manufacturing in place to get their price points down. Right. So it's a bit of a niche thing still here in Ontario. It has its place for sure. But we'll see what happens over the next couple of years. But I think, big players like Boxable down in the States, I think that could be definitely a game changer for the modular industry. Do you get the sense, we've got about 30 seconds, that a Boxable kind of recipe would work here? Again, like I said, in these urban settings, we still have a lot of restrictions, right? With setbacks and height and size. So, if they can get the price point down to such a low point, where people say, heck, you know what? It's so cheap. I'm going to put it in. I don't care if I'm not maximizing my gross floor area. I don't care if it's going to be a bit smaller than what I otherwise could build, but because it's so cheap, I'm going to put one in. Yeah,
makes a lot of sense. Hey, get more out of your home. Book a free consultation today with Ken and his team online, LegalSecondSuites.com. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and thank you for listening to Building Hamilton with Ken Bekendam, brought to you by LegalSecondSuites.com on 900 CHML.